Hey everyone, you're watching Coffee with Leibniz. Today I want to talk about René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy. Hopefully I can make a series. This will just be one of many on each philosopher. I want to talk about René Descartes. If you can't tell, he's French. He was born in 1596 and he died in 1650. So he's a 17th century philosopher. He's a man of the scientific revolution. You can call him a polymath. He was a mathematician. He had stuff to say on physics, contrary to Isaac Newton. He did optics. He wrote on anatomy, and he was a philosopher. He also knew a lot about theology. One of his famous successors were Leibniz. Another one was Spinoza. He was very influential, father of modern philosophy, but he's also very influential today. A lot of people have stuff to say about him, a lot of negative stuff. So hopefully with this video, I can tell you what Descartes' philosophy is about, but also why he holds these things. He gets attacked from left and right, both from secular contemporary people, but also a lot of religious people. And I want to clear the air, not because I'm a René Descartes defender, but I believe that there's a lot to learn from exploring René Descartes. So Descartes' main influence was a neo-scholastic called Francisco Suarez. He was praised by the Pope as the eminent doctor, or sometimes they say the exceptional doctor. And neo-scholasticism was just like the second movement of the medieval scholasticism during the Middle Ages in the Catholic Church. Some scholastics you might know of would be St. Thomas, Duns Scotus, William of Ockham, if you've heard of Occam's razor. And in the early modern period, philosophers like John Locke and David Hume, even Descartes himself, they would attack the scholastics. But Descartes was influenced by a neo-scholastic. He was also raised by a Jesuit, so even though he gets attacked and criticized by a lot of people in the Catholic Church, he was trying to help the Catholic Church. In the beginning of his meditations, I forget what publisher the book was from, but they included his dedicatory letter to the Sorbonne Academy, and so Descartes wanted his book included, or he wanted it reviewed by the theologians at the Sorbonne. Unfortunately, it was rejected. But so like Descartes was not trying to go against the church. He just wanted to add new things, add a new perspective. Anyways, so his other influences include St. Augustine. People say he copied St. Thomas. As far as St. Augustine's concerned, they say that he got his I think therefore I am from St. Augustine's part in his book called On Free Choice of the Will, where Augustine asked this man, Evodius, how do you know you exist? And so Evodius, he can't answer. So St. Augustine says, well, if you can ask the question, if you can doubt your existence, you must exist. So people say Descartes copied St. Augustine from that book. Also, Descartes' argument for God's existence, they say mimics St. Anselm's. But then on the other side, by foil, I mean, who was like Descartes going against, or who did Descartes oppose? So in the objections and replies to the meditations that Descartes published later on, there was a theologian. His name was Johannes Caterus, or his I think he was Dutch. His Dutch name is Johann Cater. Cater said that Descartes' argument for God was inferior to St. Thomas's, and why bother doing all of this work when St. Thomas did a much better job. But then Descartes explained St. Thomas's argument for God comes from, it's a cosmological argument. It's based on empirical evidence and sense experience. But Descartes is like, no, my argument is much more immediate and certain, just from the fact that I can think, that I think therefore I am. From that you can deduce that God exists, and I'll try to show that later on. Moving on to the next slide. So before we go on to Descartes' influences, we have to clarify something about the period that Descartes' coming out of. So he is from the scientific revolution, but he's not coming to philosophy. He's not approaching it with an empirical air to him. He's all about pure reason. He's a rationalist. So yes, he does. He admires the scientists. He does not oppose Galileo or his experiments or his telescope, but he believes that astronomy can be learned through mathematics, pure reason. So he's a man of the scientific revolution, but he's not all about science when it comes to philosophy, because he will soon doubt science and the senses, what we gain from the senses. But first of all, he's coming from a period of skepticism in philosophy. Back in ancient Greece, there was a man named Pyrrho of Elis who said that we have a bunch of opinions in our mind that don't really hold more weight than the other. We don't know if one opinion is more certain than the other. So he advised us to suspend judgment, to not, go with either one, just to live practically. We have so many opinions that we're uncertain about. Let's not deliberate on them. We can't. So Michel Montaigne comes along, he revives the skepticism, and he adds a new flair to it. So he says that the supremacy of faith is he talks about the supremacy of faith against man-made philosophical systems. Reason cannot establish certainty. Look at a lot of animals. We think animals are stupid, but animals sometimes have superior intellect than us. I know that sounds silly, but think of a spider weaving a web. Such a small insect can make a beautiful web. Or a bird making a nest out of hair or grass and twigs. They can make a perfect nest. And it sounds small, but think of a human who buys a tent at, Al Bean. They have all the directions with them. It's like a prefabricated tent, and they can't even pitch it. So Descartes has all of this doubt in his mind about human intellect. So he wants to test the limits. He wants to see how much can we know based on pure reason. Then he has the scholastics he has to deal with. They believe in substantial forms or real essences. So they believe that there really are properties or qualities of things that go in and out of bodies or substances that makes them what they are. An essence is something that makes something what it is. And so they get this all the way from Plato in the Phaedo, the dialogue Phaedo, where Socrates asks Phaedo about the cycle of life and death. Where does life and death come from, or how does that happen? And Socrates ends up having Phaedo accept the idea that the soul is the form of life, or the essence of life, and that life, the body's alive when the form of life goes into it, and the body dies, or people die when the form of life goes out of it. So the scholastics applied this reasoning to everything else, all other subjects. So like in Dialogues on Natural Religion, David Hume has someone ask a scholastic, okay, what makes an apple nutritious? And the scholastic would say, oh, its nutritive property. The form of nutrition goes into the apple when it grows, and then when you eat it, the form of nutrition goes into your body. Or in Moliere's play, there's a character who asks one of the other characters, what makes this drug make you sleep? What makes it dormitive? And the character says, oh, the drug has a dormitive property, where the form of sleeping is in it and it goes out of it when you take it. So yeah, they talk about these real forms or substantial forms that exist. Not very scientific. Doesn't really explain the phenomena. So Descartes wants to explain phenomena. He's also pretty frustrated that the scholastics rely on syllogisms a lot, because for him, not everything can be put into a syllogism. Like Socrates, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. So there's more things you can do than just syllogisms. So what got everyone troubled and disturbed was Descartes' new method. So scholars call it methodological doubt. It just means you doubt everything that can possibly be doubted to eliminate prejudices. So we're not doubting things just because we want to destroy everything, but we want to doubt things because um, only by doubting everything that's possibly doubted, we can arrive at the most true certainty. So Pierre Gassendi was a French atomist that was a contemporary of Descartes, and in the book Objections and Replies to the Meditations, Gassendi asked Descartes, isn't calling everything false simply a new kind of prejudice? Because the whole thing here is that Descartes wants to eliminate prejudices. So Gassendi's like, well, isn't that just a new prejudice, doubting everything? But Descartes explains, we should doubt the senses because there's a lot of things in our sense experience that doesn't appear the way reality really is. So let's say you're a Bostonian and you're at the top of the highest point in Boston. I believe it's in Roslindale or West Roxbury, and there's a street where you can look down the street and you can see the Boston skyline. And so you can see one of these buildings. This building up here is called 1 Dalton Street. It's the tallest residential building in Boston. And up close, you can see it is slightly curved, but if you're miles away, it looks like it's a flat surface. So Descartes would say this is an example of the senses deceiving you. You think that it's flat, but really it's curved up close. Or a pencil in water. You put a pencil in glass, and the pencil's bent, even though it's not really bent. So Descartes says, think of it like your best friend. If your best friend deceives you once, what reason do you have to keep believing in them? So if your senses deceive you once, what reason do we have to keep believing the senses? So this brings us to the fundamental truth of all knowledge, which is, I think, therefore I am. This is the most fundamental principle in Descartes' philosophy. So Descartes says, if there's anything I can be certain of, it is that I am thinking. Since I have doubted the existence of my body, because we doubt the senses and we have knowledge of our body through the senses, then what am I if I'm not really a body? So before we get into the main arguments, we have to define some things. So Descartes says, an idea is clear when it is immediate. An idea is distinct when it cannot be broken down into simpler ideas. Thoughts are those things which I am immediately aware of. So this definition is very important. So this includes all mental activity, so like sensations, perceptions, will, volition, thinking, imagination. So all these things we are immediately aware of. I'm immediately aware of sitting down. I'm immediately aware of the brightness of the room. And so these are all classified as thoughts. They all come under thinking. So granted these definitions, I find that I can clearly and distinctly conceive of my mind apart from my body. So we have to be careful here because this does not mean I can imagine my soul apart from my body, because a soul is not something that can be imagined. A soul is something immaterial and doesn't have material properties. So I'm not saying I can imagine my soul apart from my body. I'm not talking about an ethereal energy or light. I'm talking about an immaterial soul. And this is different from understanding. So what Descartes wants you to see is that he wants you to understand the idea of your soul apart from your body, not imagine your soul apart from your body. So with that clarified, I don't need knowledge of my body to be certain that I exist. So the essence of my existence must be that I am a thing that thinks. So I know that I exist with doubting my body, like while I'm doubting my body, I don't need knowledge of my body to know that I exist. So my essence must not include knowledge of my body. I must be a thing that thinks. I must be a mind, purely a mind. Oh, and I forgot one little thing. On the right, on the last slide, there was a man named Antoine Arnauld, and he was a Jansenist, French philosopher and theologian. The Jansenists, I heard they've been compared, or they're the Catholic analog to Calvinists, I think. They stress faith and God's grace. So Antoine Arnauld, he was a Jansenist. He had to flee because the Parliament of Paris, I guess, wanted him arrested for his claims. Descartes corresponded with him, and Antoine Arnauld, he kind of became a Cartesian, even though he doesn't really classify himself as one. But Antoine Arnauld asked Descartes, you say, I think, therefore I am, but why not just make it more general and say, I act, therefore I am? Why does it have to be specifically thinking? Because anything that acts must exist or possess existence. And so on this strand of thinking, other Descartes critics would say, I walk, therefore I am, or I talk, therefore I am, making fun of Descartes. But Descartes says, no, think about the definition of thought. Recall the definition of thought. It's whatever I'm immediately aware of. So I'm not immediately aware that I have my body is real, because I can doubt my senses. So I don't really know if I'm walking or not, or if I'm talking or not. But what I do know is that I'm thinking, because thought is what I'm immediately aware of. So that's why Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, and not I walk, therefore I am, or I act, therefore I am. Okay, finally we can get to the first argument for God's existence. It's from innate ideas or innate knowledge. This is the a posteriori argument. And for clarification, Descartes is a rationalist, so he believes that certainty and true knowledge comes from reason alone. People would say, a priori reasoning. And Descartes, he did innovate this word. It was called analysis. And it just means breaking down things into simpler parts. If you remember, there's the clear and distinct thing going on. And so he is a person who believes in deduction and mathematics and proving things from fundamental principles and not, observing things and then getting to fundamental principles. So, if you believe in deduction, you want to try to arrive at certainty through mathematics and logic and not really, science experiments and stuff like that. So, but Descartes isn't that much of a deductionist. He does still use a posteriori arguments. So like observing your own mind or reflecting, that would still be a posteriori. Very hard word. So if we can continue, since the existence of my body has been called into doubt, and I find that I am essentially a mind, I am left asking, what created me? Because we can't default to DNA and genetics and I came from a primordial soup, millions of years ago. No, we can't fall back on that, because we doubt the existence of the body and the external world, because we have knowledge of that through our senses. So we are purely a mind, and so what creates a pure mind? I have no memory of creating myself, nor is there anything in my experience or anything in these seconds of time that tell me that I will continue to exist. The bare fact of my existence does not tell me I will continue to exist. I do, however, have an idea of an infinite being, yet I know that I am not infinite. And I'm not infinite because if I created myself, I would have given myself all the perfections I can conceive, because I would have an infinite mind. And I'd give myself infinite knowledge, and I'd have no reason to doubt or desire things. Yeah, if I was God, why would I doubt stuff? Why would I desire things if I'm God? I know I'm not God. Therefore, my idea of an infinite being must have come from an infinite being. I cannot remember receiving this idea because I always possessed it. So I'm not sure if Descartes believed in if the soul was always there or pre-existed the body, but this would be a good argument if you can try to stretch it to say, if we always possess this knowledge of God, our soul must always exist. Plato would use that argument. And as a result from this, my clear and distinct ideas must have representative reality. That means they must contain the objective reality of things independent of my mind. Descartes gets whacked over the head on this a lot. Everyone bashes him for this. It's just the idea that our knowledge or our ideas, our clear and distinct ideas, must conform to reality. So they must represent something that's real. So if I can think of God clearly and distinctly, he must exist. And I'll show you how we can think of God that way. But first, I'll explain what is meant by the representative reality of clear and distinct ideas. Without giving a formal definition, I'll just use an example. Arnauld himself says, what makes an idea count as positive, meaning, saying something about reality, isn't any fact about it considered as a psychological event. Because for us, if we say every time we thought of something or had a thought that it existed, that'd be crazy. Like if I just thought of a pink elephant, that doesn't mean it exists. If it were, Arnauld says, all of our ideas would be positive. All of our ideas would mean that something corresponding to them would exist, and that's crazy. Rather, Arnauld says, clear and distinct ideas are what makes an idea positive are the facts about its representative nature, or what it represents to our mind. So if you can understand them, if they say something, you can understand, and that whether it represents something objective. So consider the contrast between imagination and understanding. I can say, I can say, it's unimaginable that an elephant could fit through a tiny ring. We can't imagine that, but we can understand it. I can understand the sentence, think of an elephant trying to fit through a ring. So just because I can't imagine it doesn't mean I can't understand it. So just because I can't imagine God doesn't mean I can't understand the sentence, God exists, or God must exist. And so this is a problem that will show up in the 20th century with people like Bertrand Russell in his famous debate with Copleston. Copleston says, you must admit that God is a necessary being. He must exist. There must be a first cause to everything. And Bertrand Russell says, well, I don't understand what that means. But careful. As my professor would say, careful, careful. All right. Concerning God's existence, all there is left to prove is that my idea of God is clear and distinct. So if I've already proven that clear and distinct ideas correspond to real things, so all I have to prove now is that my idea of God is clear and distinct. This is the a priori argument, or knowledge without experience. So when I think of a triangle, I think of an enclosed figure with three sides whose angles equal 180 degrees. When I think of a mountain, I cannot help but think of a valley next to it, because if there was nothing lower than the mountain next to it, it wouldn't be a mountain, it would be a plateau. So I conclude that the essence of a triangle must be a three-sided figure, and the essence of a mountain must include a valley. So Descartes' opponents might say, just because you can think of something, that doesn't mean that thing exists. Just because I can think of a house floating above my head doesn't mean that the house will float above my head, will defy the law of gravity. But Descartes says, well, that is true about contingent things, meaning physical, things that we encounter in our sense experience. But this is not an applicable criticism of God's existence. God is a necessary being, per the representative reality of our idea of God as an infinite being. So this is a clear idea that we have of God. When we think of God, we immediately know that he's infinite. We think of an infinite thing. We understand that God is infinite. Since it's a contradiction for an infinite being to perish, because if you're all powerful and you have I guess you are the eternity of time, it makes no sense that you should perish. So since it's a contradiction for God to perish, the definition of God is that he must exist, always. Because we cannot continue to break down or separate God's definition from God's existence, God must exist. So because we can't understand God as weak and limited, then God must exist if we understand God to be all-powerful. We can't separate God's existence from what God is, who God is, his definition. And this is a distinct idea. It's separate from everything else. We can't separate it. We can't break it down more. All right. Why can't I reject clear and distinct ideas? The answer is that God must determine the nature of our mind to think this way. If our ideas correspond to what God has ordained, God must be able to separate the soul from the body, if we can clearly and distinctly conceive of the soul apart from the body. So we have it again, our ideas must conform to the nature of reality, and they conform because God makes them conform. God's nature determines the nature of our mind. And so if we have an idea of the soul apart from the body, then God must have made it so that the soul can separate from the body. Our knowledge conforms to God's will and God's knowledge and God's power. This comes from Suarez. He called this concept of separation real distinction, as opposed to formal distinction. Like, if I think of a green triangle, I can formally separate the green from the triangle. I can think of green and then I can think of having three sides, but in reality I cannot separate them. So yes, the soul really is separable from the body. And so we have the principle repeated again. Clear and distinct ideas correspond to the facts of reality. But then we have a vicious circle, circular logic that people bash Descartes for. He didn't exactly say this, but this is like a paraphrase. We can trust clear and distinct ideas because God is not a deceiver, and we know God exists because we have a clear and distinct idea of him. So as you can see, Descartes assumes the benevolence of God. There is that doubt in the back of his mind, what if there's an evil demon deceiving us? But in the first part of the Meditations, he says, well, even if there is an evil demon trying to deceive us, that is God, we still exist. We still know we exist. And if, we wouldn't be able to know this, we wouldn't be able to have this knowledge at all if God didn't make it so. If God didn't allow us or, create a universe where we can have this knowledge. So God must be benevolent because we have clear and distinct ideas. And then we know God exists because we have clear and distinct ideas. So, if you want to defend Descartes, or if you're invested, you can try to get out of the circle. Now we have Thomas Hobbes criticizing Descartes. Thomas Hobbes, if you know, he was a 16th, 17th century political philosopher, but he was also a mechanist. So he believed, a materialist too. So he believed that everything was made of matter. There's no such thing as an immaterial soul or immaterial mind or God. A lot of people were appalled that Thomas Hobbes, I guess, hinted or said that God was a body and not a mind. Descartes says that God must be a mind and not a body because all bodies and matter are separable or divisible into parts, and something that is perfect and simple cannot be made of parts, and minds fit that description, so God must be a mind. Anyways, so Thomas Hobbes, he paraphrases or he tells you what Descartes says. So Descartes says, I now notice that the waking state is vastly different from dreams, and that dreams are never linked by memory with all the other actions of life as waking experiences are. So for context, in the beginning of the Meditations, when Descartes is doubting everything, he also doubts, am I dreaming? Because, to me, immediately, and it's not obvious that my dreams are different from waking states. So now Descartes is backpedaling because now he proved that God exists. He's saying that God is benevolent. So only from the fact that I think, therefore I am, with that out of the way, now we can start repairing our doubts. We can start taking back our doubts. So the waking state is vastly different from dreams because dreams are never linked by memory. So so basically Descartes is saying we know we are awake because we can form a coherent timeline of events from our memory. But Hobbes says, consider someone who dreams that he isn't sure whether or not he's dreaming. Couldn't he dream that this dream fits in with the ideas of a long series of past events? So couldn't he just dream that he's making a timeline from his memory? If this is possible, then the dreamer will judge certain items that appear to be events from his past life to be true occurrences, just as he might if he were awake. Moreover, as Descartes himself asserts, the certainty and truth of all knowledge depends solely on our knowledge of the true God. But in this case, an atheist can't infer that he is awake on the basis of memory of his past life. The alternative is that someone can know he is awake without knowledge of the true God. I hope you understood that. Descartes says, a dreamer cannot really connect his dreams with the ideas of past events, though he might. He might dream that he does. Everyone knows that a man may be deceived in his sleep, but afterwards, when he wakes up, he will easily recognize his mistake. An atheist can infer that he is awake on the basis of memory of his past life. But if he doesn't know that he was created by a non-deceiving God, he doesn't know for sure that this criterion is sufficient to make it certain that he isn't mistaken. So yeah, if you don't believe God is benevolent and has set up our ideas to correspond to reality, then of course an atheist won't be able to be really certain that he isn't being deceived and that he isn't dreaming when he thinks he's awake. All right, now this is Spinoza on the left. He was also called a Cartesian. I guess he was a Cartesian in his youth, but he developed his own philosophy. But he wrote a book called The Principles of Cartesian Philosophy. His name was Baruch Spinoza. I'm sorry, my Hebrew is not good. It just means blessed. So in the book, Spinoza explains that the I think, therefore I am argument, or the cogito, as it's famously called, cogito ergo sum, that argument is a syllogism. So the major premise of the syllogism is, if I am thinking, then I exist. The minor premise is, I am thinking. The conclusion is, therefore I exist. But Spinoza says, the I think, therefore I exist part is not a syllogism in which the major premise is omitted. If it were the premise, I am thinking, ought to be better known than the conclusion, therefore I exist. So if I think, therefore I exist, if I am thinking was the major premise, it should be more immediately certain or more known to us than therefore I exist. So, and if this were the case, the therefore I exist would not be the foundation of all knowledge, because it relies on the universal premise. So Descartes previously doubted that things exist because they think. Sorry, this is confusing. So Spinoza is implying that if you just say I am thinking, therefore I exist, that means everything, in order to exist, you must be able to think. That's a universal premise that's wrong, and so it's not true. It's not obviously true that everything that exists thinks. So Spinoza is just highlighting a problem in the syllogism that Descartes created. This is what Kant would say later on, Immanuel Kant, but yeah, Spinoza anticipated it. Now we get on to metaphysics. So in Descartes' philosophy, there's only 3 substances. So a substance is that which depends on nothing else except God, created substances. The 2 created substances are body and mind. So there's not, an infinite number of substances like in some other philosophy. For Descartes, all matter is one substance and all minds are one substance. So creation, since we're talking about created substances, creation is an operation in which no causes except the efficient one occurs. So created object is one that supposes nothing other than God in causing it. So if you can see, this involves that theological principle, creation out of nothing, or creation ex nihilo, the Latin phrase that a lot of the Catholic theologians use, because according to the Bible, God created everything from nothing. So Descartes, he puts that into technical terms and says creation is an operation in which no causes are involved except an efficient one. Efficient means, it can mean like energy, it could mean start or beginning, or like a push, like that first beginning to something. Because in the early modern period that Descartes is writing, they're coming off of the medieval philosophy, which talked a lot about Aristotle and borrowed a lot of things from Aristotle. And Aristotle's idea of causality, there was material cause, or material explanation. So a thing can be explained or caused by something based on its matter. So the material cause of a table would be the wood, and the formal cause would be its organization or its structure, what makes the table, the shape it is and stuff like that. And then there would be final cause, or like purpose of something. So the final cause would be what the purpose of that thing is. So God, according to the medievals, God makes everything to strive towards God, or to be useful, or everything is good. God calls everything good, and so everything has a purpose, a good purpose. But in Cartesian philosophy, creation involves nothing, no material cause, no formal cause or final cause. Creation is just involves an efficient cause, just that first push by God to create everything. So all bodies and minds are part of creation. They were created out of nothing. And then God is uncreated, and so those are the three substances. And as you can see on the top, the essence of body is extension, or having dimensions, three-dimensionality, length, width, and height. We know that through the senses. And the essence of mind, as Descartes proved early on, is thinking. We are thinking beings. Now we can go on to Descartes' physics. This comes right off of what he said about creation. But first, Descartes, he did not like atomism. So in the early modern period, there were theorists who theorized that everything was made of particles. Some people called them atoms, or corpuscles. So they didn't have microscopes, they didn't have electron microscopes, but they were theorizing about atoms. This goes all the way back to ancient Greece. Descartes did not like that because for him, matter was infinitely divisible. So there really can't be the smallest possible particle, because everything is infinitely divisible. You can't get down to the root, you can't get down to the base, because it goes all the way down, infinitely divisible. But he did allow for these things. They were hooked particles, or angular, according to Spinoza. And these are Descartes he thought that particles had hooks because how else would particles stick together? Because spheres cannot stick together. So the reason why Descartes believes this is because he did not allow that particles had energy. He didn't believe in kinetic energy. There was really no formula for kinetic energy at the time. So Descartes thought that all matter was inert and lifeless. Because remember, the essence of minds is thinking. So that kind of involves energy, or a life force, if you may. But with matter, if matter is just pure extension, then matter has no energy. So for Descartes, he would say, matter cannot move on its own. It doesn't have energy. There was even there was kind of a theory of gravity back then. It was talked about by Aristotle. Aristotle said, everything moves to the center of the universe, and so everything moves to Earth because Earth is the center. Remember the geocentric model. Then later on in the Renaissance and medieval times, there was I forget his name, but he said everything falls towards the Earth based on weight, and everything falls toward the earth because it's the center. And so they didn't really have a theory of gravity. But Descartes said, well, if earth is pulling everything towards itself because it is the center, earth would have to be a mind, because how does it know that it is the center? Only minds can have knowledge, and only minds can have enough energy to pull something towards it. So he's like, okay, gravity is an occult quality. Gravity is just a quality made up by people that can't explain the nature of reality, that can't explain phenomena. Occult qualities was just a famous term used by philosophers to dismiss things that they said, that's an occult quality. Magic is an occult quality, or alchemy, or gravity. Surprisingly, Isaac Newton, he did alchemy and gravity. So yeah, a lot of the rationalists did not like gravity. Descartes also thought that the whole universe was a plenum, meaning solid or full. So everything is packed full with matter. Yes, there's air and water and earth and fire, but there's no vacuum, there's no empty space. Everything's full of matter. Because how else could he explain motion? He can't explain motion if there are empty spaces. For him, that would make no sense. And because God creates everything out of nothing, this brings Descartes to the conservation of energy principle. So he says, if the universe could not, if the universe did not have enough energy to create itself, how would it have enough energy to sustain itself? Because creation takes more energy than sustaining. So Descartes says, therefore, the universe has no energy that belongs to itself. All of the energy is God's energy. So God preserves the same amount of motion in nature. God is the one that sustains the universe because he created the universe, and he has the energy to do it. This goes back to his meditations. Remember when he says God sustains our existence? So God is the one that created us, and so God is the one that keeps us not alive, but he keeps us in existence, everything in existence. So this is the early formulation of the conservation of energy. You have the I forget what they're called, the balls on strings, and so you pick one up and you let it go, and the other ball comes out at the other end at the same height because the energy is conserved, the momentum is conserved. Descartes later elaborates that the parts of duration do not have a causal connection, so there's no causal connection between the seconds of time. Therefore, it is proper to say that God continuously procreates everything, then conserves everything. So that's another thing that his detractors caught him on. They asked him, like, clarify. Do you mean God creates everything anew every second? God is continuously creating us again and again, and we're just lasting. That's how we are sustained. So Descartes says yes, because there's no causal connection between time, the seconds of time. God is the one that is doing it. Also, we have no clear and distinct idea of an annihilated object, so philosophy does not need to inquire what God, by his omnipotence, is able to do. Like Isaac Newton would ask, what would happen if God destroyed all matter? Isaac Newton also believes in void or vacuum, because gravity travels across space, or it's a force that is alive across space. Descartes is like, no, we don't need to think about that because we have no clear and distinct idea of space or vacuum or an annihilated object. So all this talk about particles brings us to the controversy around real accidents. I'm not talking about car accidents. For Descartes, accidents are properties belonging to a substance whose removal does not change the essence of the substance, or what that substance is, or what makes it that substance. So color and shape are accidents of wax. This goes back to the meditations where Descartes, he's holding a piece of wax, like a candle wax, by the fire. And as the heat warms up the wax, he notices, it begins to melt, and it's sticky, and it might smell different or taste different. And Descartes is saying, okay, well then the color of the wax and the shape of the wax must really not determine the nature of the wax. The wax is still wax, even though it's not the same color or the same shape. It's still wax. So these are accidents. These are accidental. They don't really belong to the essence of the wax. Substance is always prior to accidents. So accidents could not freely float without belonging to a substance. So you cannot have stickiness or yellowness or mushiness without something being mushy or sticky or yellow. You can't just have those qualities freely floating. And we have to talk about them as belonging to something like matter. So they need something to inhere in. Inherence. That's what it's called. But real accidents come from the theory of theologians trying to explain the doctrine of transubstantiation. This is where the accidents of the bread, of the Eucharist, freely float with no substance underlying them. So, if you go to Holy Communion at a Catholic church, we are taught that the bread of the Eucharist is transformed into the body of Christ. It is Jesus Christ's flesh. We're eating Jesus Christ's flesh. But theologians had to explain, how does that come about? Because, it looks like bread, it tastes like bread. So they say, the substance of the bread becomes Christ's body, but the appearance, like the accidents, the qualities of the bread, still freely float. They attach to the body of Christ. So the substance of the bread is replaced by the substance of Christ, or the body of Christ, but the accidents, the qualities remain. And Descartes is like, how can that be? Because accidents cannot freely float without belonging to their proper substance. Like, it just makes no sense. How could the yeastiness of the bread, or the fluffiness of the bread, or the crustiness of the bread, how can that freely float above the body of Christ? How can that attach to the body of Christ without there being bread, the substance of bread? So his solution is to say that so particles surround the bread before it's turned into the body of Christ. And when the priest says the words, and the bell rings, and he holds up the bread, that's when the interior transforms into Christ's flesh. And so when we eat the bread, we're eating Christ's flesh, but the particles on the surface, they form a shell around the flesh. And so we're tasting the bread and we're smelling the bread, but really we're eating Christ's flesh. So I thought that was a cool theory, an innovative theory. Maybe some scientists can experiment on that, but yeah, I'm not rejecting that theory. I think it's interesting. So now we can move on to other Cartesians. On the left is Gerard de Cordemoy, or Cordemoy. I don't know how to say French, I'm sorry. He was an atomist. He tried to reconcile atomism with Descartes' physics. You remember, because Descartes believes all matter is infinitely divisible. It's not possible that there's a smallest unit of matter. And this is because matter has no energy. So matter, it can't form itself. It can't remain unified, or it can't combine itself into a unit, a clump or something, because it has no energy. God must be doing all this stuff. And then we also have Nicolas Malebranche, or Malebranche, if you're American. He was a Cartesian. He came after Descartes. He's getting famous now. He is getting more noticed now by scholars, but he wasn't early on. He influenced George Berkeley, an empiricist from Ireland. He also influenced David Hume, who's like an infamous skeptic, supposedly a skeptic. That's what a lot of people say he is. Malebranche, he was very influential. He belonged to an oratory, so it was like a Jesuit monastery kind of thing. It wasn't really a monk, but he was walking around one day in a flea market, and he saw there was a book seller, and on the bookshelf was Descartes' book on anatomy. And as Malebranche was reading it, he started getting heart palpitations. So it's really funny. Like, he was very enchanted by Descartes, and so he used Descartes' physics around the conservation of momentum and energy, and he brought that to the extreme. So Descartes differentiated the movement of bodies from the energy in bodies. So he called it translation versus motion. So just because an object moves down a hill, or moves to the left or right, doesn't mean that the body moved itself or had motion in itself. So he made that distinction. But Malebranche comes along and brings that to the extreme. He says, okay, therefore, God must be the sole energy in the universe, and God must be doing everything. So when two baseballs hit each other and bounce back, they did not, according to Malebranche, they did not transfer motion themselves. It was God transferring the motion. Or if a domino knocks down another domino, it's not because a domino transferred its motion or energy to the other domino. It's because God did it. And he even brought that to the mind-body relation. So because mind and body are different things, they're different substances with their own essences, it's not possible that they could interact. So thinking cannot move a body, or thinking cannot touch a body. So when I want to raise my arm, I decide with a mental thought to raise my arm. God must be raising my arm. So it's called occasionalism. So matter, or bodies, provide the occasion for God to intervene in the world, or they signal, or they provide the reason for God to come in and move things, because things happen, or we cause things to happen, or we think we cause, but God is really the cause of everything. Don't worry, second to last slide. So then we have the impact on empiricism. So I said Descartes was a rationalist. He believes all true and certain knowledge comes from reason and reason alone, a priori knowledge. But then they're the empiricists from Britain. They believe that all knowledge comes from the sense perception, but they still continue to use Descartes. So Descartes, in the wax example, Descartes says, okay, color and smell and taste, they are secondary qualities. They exist only in the mind, like pain. So he uses the clear and distinct method to distinguish certain qualities. So thinking is an essential quality of the mind. We are immediately aware of thinking as belonging to the mind, and we are immediately aware that solidity and shape belong to bodies, because we can't conceive of bodies without them having a shape or being solid or impenetrable. But then so Locke clarifies, or he calls this the primary secondary quality distinction. So primary qualities are things that really exist in bodies, like solidity, shape, extension, length, width, and height. If there were no minds in the universe, there'd still be things with shape, solidity, and length. But stuff like color and smell and taste and pain, they really don't belong to bodies. Like Descartes says, I'm immediately aware that I'm thinking, but I'm not immediately aware that pain is in my body. When I stub my toe on a chair, I don't know if pain is part of my leg or my toe, if it's in my mind, or if it, did it come out of the chair and go into my leg? So for him, it's not obvious. It's not obvious that pain is part of our body, and so it's not clear and distinct. Locke also uses the clear and distinct terminology when he talks about substances. We have no clear and distinct idea of substance, because for him, our idea of substance comes from observing objects that persist in time, or they have qualities, and they the wax, we say the wax is a substance because it has colors and smells and tastes and texture, and even if it loses those things, it still remains the same matter. But we can only call that a substance based on what we see. So we really have no clear and distinct idea of substance apart from our experience. Also, funny thing is, with relations, we have a clear idea of what a father and mother are. We can immediately point to a father and mother. We really know what that is. We understand what that is. But then when we say, okay, the nature of a father is to have a son, to marry, a wife or something. But what is the nature of man? What's the nature of human being? Yeah, that's not obviously clear to us. So the funny thing is, father is more clear to us than man, even though it takes a man to be a father. And then we have Berkeley, who was an Irish philosopher. He's known for his subjective idealism. So remember Descartes' definition of thought as whatever we immediately are aware of. So if you take that definition, it's really hard to think of tables and chairs as really existing material objects apart from our mind. I'm immediately aware of this table. So it's hard to say, oh, this table exists apart from my mind, because I can't say that. I'm immediately aware of it, so it must be a thought in my mind. It's an idea. I can't really say it's an object outside of my mind. So yeah, Berkeley is known for subjective idealism, the idea that we create objects in our mind and we say that they're real. And so I believe this is our last slide. Oh, second to last. These are the paralogisms by Descartes and Kant. I will get to this in my next video because I've already gone over a lot more. We'll talk about this later. But what you need to remember is it's the meditations, not disputations. So this goes back to the medieval times. In the medieval era, the theologians and philosophers in the Catholic Church, they'd be writing disputations, arguments. I'm trying to prove a case. They're bickering. And Descartes did not like that. Descartes says, I'm essentially a mind. And he knows that because he's meditating. So he reflects on himself. He's not here to argue or bicker. He's here to start from scratch, a new slate, and reflect on his ideas. And I have an idea of God, which proves to me that God exists. It could not have come from any other being, nor can I deny its representative reality. And my idea of God is clear and distinct, so God must exist. So these are the things you should remember, and I hope you understood. I hope this was enough enthusiasm and energy for you. I will be back soon with my next video. I will talk about Immanuel Kant and see how Descartes would respond to him. But I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe to Coffee with Leibniz. Thank you so much. Have a good day.